I'm overwhelmed already. I mean, you start crying already. It's brilliant to be here with like-minded people in a physical event. Who knew? Well done, Hannah. Well done. Yeah, face to face. Well, I was wondering what I was going to talk about. Clay, probably. I'll talk about clay, seeing as we're at a clay event. And for the last couple of weeks, I've been sitting on my potter's wheel, and I've been thinking about how I'm going to start it off. And I don't know why, but this kind of phrase came into my head, and it's from the Bill Clinton's electoral sort of campaign many years ago. It's the economy, stupid. It's the economy. Do you remember that phrase? Some of you may be too young to know. Well, it's the clay, stupid. It's the clay. And it is about the clay. It's incredibly, it's all about the clay. And I'll try not to do this too much. But it is all about the clay. And I hadn't realised this until I started my training at Harefield Pottery many, many years ago, back in the 80s. I hadn't realised it was about the clay until, a good 3 or 4 years into actually training at Harefield. And what it was, we all make stuff. We use clay as the canvas for what we create and what we want to send out there and the message we want to get across through our pottery creative endeavours. And that's what it's really all about. And it hadn't really twigged to me until I was heavily training and throwing, production throwing. We were making about 3,000 or 4,000 pieces a week, the three of us. And I'm only going to throw a couple of pots today, but the first one I'm going to throw is just a typical traditional jug shape. And the reason why I'm going to throw this is because it took me bloody years to perfect it. Absolutely years. Alan, my ex-boss, Alan Pett, he said if you can throw a jug and you can throw it repetitively, 50, 100, 200 times, then you're a potter. Then you can call yourself a potter. And what it was, yeah, don't worry, lovey. It's not really that drastic. But it was all about the clay. And the minute I started trying to throw this kind of traditional kind of pot on the wheel, I suddenly realised why it was all about the clay. And I think for me, the traditional kind of sort of jug shape just sums it all up. You've got to know where you're going to put the clay within the pot itself. You've got to really be mindful of the consistency of the clay, and also you change the clay's direction, and you'll see in a minute what I mean by that, in such a dramatic way when you're working on this kind of particular shape. And kind of the penny sort of dropped that I'd been thinking about the end game for far too long, what I was actually going to make. I was visualising what I was going to make before actually thinking about the material I was really using. And this really was it was kind of the third epiphany moment in my career. The first epiphany moment was when I literally, at the age of 11, most of you know all this already, but when I first touched the clay, I mean, it was without, I'm not a religious person, that much, but it was like in a religious experience. It was incredible. The moment I touched the clay, I knew this was for me. And the second time I had an epiphany moment was when I asked Alan at the young old age of 18, that's the young age of 18, I said, when am I going to be able to, work on the potter's wheel with you guys? Before that, I was just making the clay, preparing the clay for my two bosses at the time. And he just said to me, I'll give it about 5 or 6 years. And of course, at 18, that's not the thing you really want to hear. but they were kind of right. He was right. And it took me about 3 years before I was deemed good enough to sort of throw just the simple shapes that we did at Harefield. And basically, this was kind of the last shape that I threw when Alan actually gave me that kind of, that nod that, you know what, you're all right now. You're okay. And it was just this traditional shape. And you have to visualize the shape before you start throwing. You have to prepare the shape as you're throwing. I'm a bit hyper today, so I'm a bit juddery all over. I'm really actually very excited about being here. It's fantastic. It's really wonderful. And here we go. I'm throwing the shape, and as you can see, I'm actually quite nervous. And you're constantly just feeling the clay, feeling how you can pull it, how you can work it, you know, what's the consistency of the clay, and you start forming your shape. And it was this bit that I'm just about to do, wait for it, folks. It's this bit that I'm just about to do that took me years and years to actually master properly. And it was the fact that you change the direction of the clay and you want to accentuate that shoulder. And I don't know how many times I showed Alan my traditional jugs. I know that sounds a bit rude. My traditional jugs. And he said, no, you still haven't got it. You still haven't got it. And it suddenly twigged what it was. And it was the fact that I wasn't getting this shoulder absolutely right. And the fact that I wasn't leaving any clay at the top of the rim to form your spout. I mean, you know, for some of you, this all sounds blindingly obvious. And, you know, it's just incredible when you get that kind of epiphany moment, when you get that moment when you're on the wheel. Could you see how nervous I am? I don't know why I'm nervous. I'm with like-minded people, so I shouldn't be nervous, should I? And it was just doing this shape time and time again and getting that fluidity of the shape. And also, when I was taught to look always at the horizon of the pot. And I know that sounds a bit strange, but I know a lot of potters, they have that potter's nod. Yeah, you know that potter's nod? Well, that was literally hit out of me as a pubescent 18-year-old. I wasn't allowed to do that. I was in the canal if I did that. The pottery was by a canal, and the threats of being in the canal were constant. And the wheel goes round, so your head doesn't have to. And that was what I was always told. And I was told just to look at the horizon, look at the profile, because you bet your bottom dollar that bit of that piece of that pottery, of that piece of pot is going to come round in seconds. So you don't have to do that. You literally don't have to do that. And so it's not a brilliant one, but it'll do. It'll do for the purposes of here. And it was putting, Alan and Robert always used to say, you've got to put the meat in the right place. You've got to have the meat at the bottom and the meat at the top. And, you know, you prepare all your pots for the next stage. You're always doing that, aren't you? You prepare the clay to make the pot. So it stands to reason when you're making the pot, you're preparing it for the next process. And that's what I love about pottery. It's all about preparation to the next stage. And without sounding too hippie nightmare, It is. It's like life itself. It really is like preparing yourself. And so I've got loads and loads of meat at the top now to make a nice, generous spout. I'm doing this very quickly, by the way. And nice generous movements there. And there's your jug. And that literally took me about 2.5, 3 years. Now, you think, oh yeah, anyone can make a jug. Try making 200 all exactly the same. And that, again, for me, is the fascinating thing about pottery. It's the discipline. The discipline. It doesn't matter whether you're a conceptual potter, whether you're a mass production potter like myself, or whether you're a studio slab work potter. It's about the discipline you put into that process. And so the first slide, please, Keith. Yeah, he's Keith as well. It's a good name, Keith, apparently. Yeah, oh, yeah, right. You can get rid of that one. Let's go on to the next one. Right, so I'm now going to cut to about 20 years, 25 years, I think, forwards, when I then teamed up with a business partner, and we formed a company called Make International. And so, for me, it was an amazing transition that I go from the potter's wheel in Highgate and then on to Whitstable to over to China. And we start working with the wonderful clay that is porcelain. And Chinese porcelain, the clue's in the name, China, as in China. Chinese porcelain is quite incredible stuff. And it's not like, it's a hard-paced porcelain. It's not like the kind of porcelain you get over here or in France or the Limoges porcelain. It's much, much harder than that. And I remember the first time I went to the factory that we now have in China and now a studio over there, I looked out of the factory gates and that's what you saw. You saw the China clay, you saw the kaolin, that's their quarry. And again, I'd travelled 6,000 to 7,000 miles across the world and I was looking at another load of clay. And I remember, I haven't got it with me actually, but I remember taking the first ever prototype that I'd made on the wheel in Whitstable. And I remember taking it over there on the plane, and we visited this factory that we've now been working for with over 15, 16 years. We work with about 6 or 7 factories over there at the moment. But I was talking to the factory owner. You can go on to the next slide, actually, Keith. Yeah, I was talking to the factory owner, and he was holding my prototype. And as we were talking, he was feeling the prototype in his hands. And we're talking, and he's talking in Pidgin English, and I'm talking in Pidgin Mandarin, which isn't a pretty sight, to say the least. And he's constantly feeling the prototype in his hand. And as we're talking, he's subconsciously or consciously thinking of how he's going to process this in the factory setting. And for him and for me, we were literally conversing through the clay. We literally were doing that. And this picture here is basically the clay processing plant, which is just outside the factory. And all those there you can see are rows and rows of filter presses, where they, for anyone who doesn't know, they dig the clay out of the quarry. They then mix it with different materials, and one of them being petancy, which is the thing that really makes Chinese porcelain so special. And they process all the clay. You can, Keith, next one. And they process all the clay, and they make it into these huge, massive sumps of slip, and they pump them through those filter presses. And then those filter presses, like a concertina, you open them up, and you have these press cakes, clay cakes, which are then pugged through a pug mill, massive pug mill. I mean, the pug mill, yeah, it's probably as long as this tent, huge thing. And then they're all put on lorries, and brought over to the factory. And then it's at the stage where I kind of recognised it. And when I walked through the factory, the first range of ceramics that we did was my KBJ word range, which I'd been hand making for Heels and various people for a number of years. But we were trying to emulate that in a mass production setting. And there's a couple of flaws with it. There's a couple of issues that are really hard to emulate within a factory setting. And it's going to look different, obviously, I knew that. But what we were trying to do was extol the process of achieving and developing this product in this factory setting. And again, what it came down to was it was all about the clay, and it was about the consistency of the clay. And I don't know whether you know the range. It's got little bloody words on, not bad for a dyslexic potter. But it's a range and it's got little words on. But it's actually incredibly, not complex, but you need to understand the clay body itself to be able to achieve this in a factory setting. You're making, if I told you, you get 28,000 mugs in a container. And we were producing about 100,000 mugs a week at this factory. And it's all about the consistency. But the way the process was to achieve this particular aesthetic and this particular design was the clay had to be at the right consistency or the right condition at each individual stage of the process. So if we go on to the next slide. Who's that? Oh, right. Oh, she's just fettling there. So you can see inside the factory there, fettling hundreds of, not thousands of mugs. And you get it in Stoke, obviously, and you get it in China. These people, and this is a family-run factory. It's been in their their family for literally generations. And clay over there is literally a way of life. Literally a way of life. And the way they talk about the clay, the way they interact with the clay, it's like you and I breathing, really, seriously. And it's such an amazing connection that they have with the clay. I knew straight away that he would understand what I was talking about to achieve this basic aesthetic. And if we move on to the next slide, oh, there's Phil. That's Phil, that is. He's great. He's OCD nightmare, and he loves packing kilns, thank God. And you can see obviously on the left of the image, that's Phil, and he's by his kiln pack there. And the other one is that's one of the smaller kilns, and these are front-loading kilns, gas kilns. And the wonderful thing about the clay over there, the porcelain, is that it's only once fired. So when it dries, it's completely it's like rock hard. You can even dip plates into the glaze, and it stays in its true form, and then it's just fired. And I remember talking to the factory owner, Ben, and I was saying, so how do you get it so pure? How do you get it so white? There's no impurities in there. And it was so funny because in his pidgin English, he just pointed to the ceiling and he said, no, higher, higher, higher. We just burn all the carbon out, higher, higher, higher. We go to about 1350 degrees centigrade, and it kind of really burns out all the carbon, and you're left with this lovely off-white cream, extremely dense, permanent porcelain. It's wonderful. And I love Phil because Phil's been there for years. Not his real name. I don't know what his Chinese name is. I couldn't pronounce it anyway. And I used to help him pack the kilns because it's wonderful. When I go over there, I sometimes work on the factory floor with all the workers because and the factory owner is, they obviously have a hierarchical system. He's the boss. He's got a long finger, Fu Manchu, and this is to it's cultural appropriation there, Marge, steady. But turn it down a notch. He's got this long finger, and it's basically to amplify the nail, to amplify that he doesn't do manual work. and this is obviously a big status symbol and this, that, and the other. So you could never quite understand why I just want to leave the showroom and just go and work with the workforce on the factory floor. And I still, when I go over there, he laughs at me. He says, yeah, go on, piss off to the factory floor, you're fine. And I go off there and I talk to all the workers and work on the factory floor. And it's really, really wonderful. And the thing that you literally can't describe is that the workers just have this affinity with the clay. They know exactly when to work on it. They exactly know when to leave it alone. It's just mind-blowing. And if we go to the next slide, there we go. If you just click on the video. So this is in our other factory. This is even bigger. But this guy here, this is brilliant. This guy here, he's glazing the inside of mugs, right? But he's doing it with a basketball. He's got, you'll notice, he's got a basketball on the floor. And the glaze is filled in the basketball. And he just literally taps his foot on the basketball to shoot up the glaze up into the inside of the mug. And you think, wow, how basic is that? But as we all know, it looks easy, doesn't it? It looks easy. If you're a slab builder or whatever, I mean, the amount of work you see here, the eclectic range of work you see here is just absolutely amazing. And you think, oh yeah, I could build a cat, I could do that, I could make a bowl, this, that, the other. But that's another thing, what I love about ceramics. It's the ability for that person, that potter, to understand the clay they're using. And we all know different clays have different personalities. And you use that clay for what it's good for that aesthetic value that you want to achieve and you want to get out of it. And it's the same with the decoration and working with the clay. And yeah, he just devised this idea that I'll get a basketball, I'll fill it, I'll put one pipe in that brings the glaze in, one pipe out, and I'll just do that. And it'll just, fill up the inside of the mug, and there we go. And he did it with such ease that you forget the glaze has to be the right consistency. He has to make sure that if he slams his foot on the basketball, and I'm accentuating this because I want people to realise and understand, and when we do the show, that understand that it's not as simple as it looks to the observer, and he'd obviously honed this down over years to get this really efficient way of glazing the inside of the mugs. So if we go to the next slide, and you'll see now, yeah. So she's now stamping the KBJ stamp on the bottom of the mugs. They've been jiggered. They're now on little collars to keep them in the right shape, so they're not distorted. And she knows exactly when to stamp the clay. Now these are jiggered, and this porcelain it's weird stuff. I've thrown with it. It's a bit weird. It's a bit thixotropic, and it's strange stuff to throw with, but it's fantastic to machine make with. And she knows exactly when to stamp the back stamp. And again, you think, oh, well, anyone can just shove your bloody stamp in the clay and it's, done and dusted. But no, you want to get a good impression. The clay has to be just right to get the right depth. And I don't know whether you guys, if you stamp your work, I mean, I stamp my work, I like to get the right consistency of the stamp. You don't want it too deep, you don't want it too shallow. And, it's just little details like that make you understand the clay more, that you have a connection. And then God forbid you use a different clay, because it'll be different again. And that's what I really loved. And so I call her Sally, not her real name again. I don't know what her real name is. And then if we go over to the other video, she's then stamping the word into the clay, into the side of the mug. And the way she's doing it is that because they've been jiggered, they have this kind of hard film on them from the plaster. And if you just stamp it straight away, you don't get the right definition. And you know, when we first started doing it, when I built up a team there to start decorating, blimey, 12, 13 years ago now, we had a high rejection rate. And then this lovely lady came up with this idea of she just literally just slightly dampens the surface of where she's stamping and then stamps with these resin stamps that we've had made up just to get the right impression. Because the next slide is when we put the colour into the stamp. I'm not banging on about the word range. Really, that's not what this is about. This is really about understanding a process to understand the clay and what you have to do. And in my handmade studio setting, I'm inlaying the colour and I biscuit fire them and I wipe the clay and there's your word. There's this. We can't do that. These are raw fired, and we can't do that. But if we used the underglazes that I use, you get all this fluxing and spit out of the stamp. So again, the colour has been specially devised for this particular process. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. We've tried it. It doesn't work. And she literally just rubs off the excess of the colour with a brush, with a stiff brush. And lo and behold, the word, I think it's hot on that, which, funnily enough, was the first word I ever did in the word range. Because I'm dyslexic, I just love the word hot. I just loved it. I loved the shape of it. I thought it was great. And again, it's the consistency of the clay. If we go on to the next slide, there's some mugs in all these massive bamboo baskets, and they just load them all up, and they literally just pile them all up on top of each other, ready to be packed and finished off. They're all ground down. The bases are ground down because this clay is incredibly hard, and so we smooth off the bases on a carborundum plate, a high-speed carborundum plate, and then they're packed away, ready for wherever they're going to go. Next slide. Oh, that's the factory owner and me. As you can see, we get on quite well, and we can skip that one now. Skip that slide. And so my relationship with clay has been like a companion all the way through my life, all the way through my career. It's been the constant in my life, and it's constantly working with the clay and readdressing what you want out of it and what it can give you. And that brings me on to this lovely bunch of people here from the last throwdown. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, if you talk to a potter about pots and that and clay, there's that instant connection. There's that kind of knowing smile that you relate to, because it's all about trial and error. It's the definition of what we all need to do in life, and that's live and learn. You live and learn. You try something, it doesn't work, you try it again. And you're constantly looking for that kind of perfection. And funnily enough, it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I suddenly realised, being a perfectionist, I suddenly realised perfection is kind of unattainable. It was only about 4 years ago I realised that. And for quite a lot of my career, my pottery career, I have been fairly frustrated, haven't I, Marge? Yes. Really quite frustrated. And it was that, again, maybe the fourth epiphany moment, that I realised, clay constantly moves. It constantly moves all the time. From the moment you dig it out of the ground, to the moment you work on it, to the moment you make something, to the moment it dries, to the moment it goes in the bloody kiln, for God's sake. It's still moving. It's still that organic force that we've used for centuries. And it's only until you freeze it with fire that it's there, it's this permanent structure, it's this permanent thing. And you can look at a pot and you can look at something you've made and you remember all those processes back to when you actually dug it out or bought some from Valentine's Clay. And it's incredible. And when we do this show, which I must admit, when I was first asked to do the show, I thought, pottery on telly? Really? It's like watching paint dry, surely. And lo and behold, I think we've created a fairly entertaining program, but also, for me, it's not the entertaining bit that's the important bit. It's extolling the virtues of the process. It's extolling the virtues. It's flagging up to people that are non-believers that there is a hell amount of thought and process and forward thinking that goes into making something. And we get these 12 wonderful potters on the show, and just in the 10 weeks we film the show, if they survive that long, it's just amazing how much they grow. We all do it, and it's incredible to see their journey of moments of clarity, of when the penny drops, when they've finally done a process that they'd never done before, and they've tried it out and it's worked. And for me, in the last series, for me, the big one was Peter. I absolutely loved it when Peter came up with his Acoma pot, because the penny had finally dropped, because he wasn't all that to start with, I must say. And he knows that. I told him. But by God, was he wonderful at the end. Like all of them. They were just absolutely amazing. And it's that journey that you go on with this organic substance from start to finish that is just so wonderful and so mesmerizing about the clay. And that's why I talk about traveling 6,000 miles away to China in a totally different setting to these guys, or even my studio in Whitstable, into this factory setting. And what we're really all talking about is the clay. That's what we're talking about. And people often say to me, what's the favourite thing that you like throwing on the wheel? And for me, it's a bowl. I love making bowls. And I was at some humny-numny drinks event way back when, drinking cocktails and canapes and all this thing at the British Museum. And I was talking to the head curator there. And he said, and this is mind-blowing, well, it was at the time for me, he said, you do realise, Keith, one of the oldest shapes in the world is a bowl. If you showed a bowl to a Stone Age man or a caveman or whatever, Neolithic man, I don't know, however you want to describe it, some bloke that was really old, or woman that was really old back in the day, they would recognise a bowl. They wouldn't even recognise a knife or a fork or a wheel, but they'd recognise a bowl. It's a design classic. It's been with us for years, literally thousands of years. And that, for me, just sums up ceramics. It sums up pottery. That's why we do what we do, because we have that connection with the clay, and we have that urge to communicate through that clay. And so when these guys, I don't know what how are we doing for time? So when those guys make something, and gals make something, and them, I've got to say that now. When those people make something on the show, and they're standing there, and the bench is here, the judging bench is here, and they plonk that thing down on the table, and we're both looking at it, Rich and I, and Potter, and we're looking at it, And if it communicates that process for me, well, you know what I do? I start blubbing, and it's annoying. I must admit, it is annoying. And but it's that epiphany moment. It's that lovely, lovely moment when someone is finally communicating through what they've made with clay. Let's face it, it's the best material that man uses. I mean, come on, you know. I know I'm preaching to the converted. So I'm just going to throw a bowl now. And the reason why I like bowls is because of the story I've just said, one of the reasons. And the other reason is because, for me, it's such a sharing shape. It's such a lovely shape. You kind of, here, do you want a drink? No, maybe not. But you share with a bowl. It's like, it's almost like the pottery version of cupped hands. And I love it. I love it for that reason. And as Marge will know, I often make bowls for people and give them away. I give hundreds of bowls away, don't I? Because I love making bowls. And when you make anything, certainly on the wheel, but you know, on the bench, the first thing you're thinking about, whether you're thinking about it subconsciously or consciously, you're thinking about the condition of the clay. You're thinking about, is it gonna work with me today? Is it gonna stand up to what I want it to do? And that's one of the reasons why you don't necessarily have to look at what you're making, because you're just feeling the clay through your hands. You're just feeling that clay and the speed of the wheel, and you're using all those senses that you get in your hands. And if anyone hasn't done this yet, I'm sure most of you have done, you've got to throw something blindfold, because and be really, when you do it, fully clothed is probably better, but when you do it, be really mindful, be really conscious of why you're doing it. And the minute you close your eyes, or the minute you blindfold yourself, your hands just become so sensitive. They just become your eyes. And it's just wonderful. And you can just feel it. I mean, Marge will tell you this, but through lockdown, you know, in my capacity as director of Make International, or one of them, I look at a screen for far too long these days. I mean, I'm sure we've all been there, Zoom and Teams meetings and designing stuff on a screen. And I don't know about you guys, but I do get a bit funny if I don't touch clay for about 2 or 3 days. And Marge sort of reminds me, she sort of says, "Go downstairs, Keith. You need to work on a bit of clay." And it's just that process, and it's just that mindfulness that you get from this incredibly malleable substance that just calms you down, and it centers you as you center the clay on the wheel. It just makes you feel a lot calmer. And again, without sounding too hippie nightmare, but I'm going to, it's because it's clay. It's because it comes from the earth. It's because we've used it since back in the day when we were all living in caves. And I'm sure of it. I have no doubt about that. And it's a wonderful thing. And no matter what context you see someone working in it, whether it'll be a program on Channel 4, or a guy in China or Australia or a wood firer in, well, lots of them in Tasmania. Yeah, there's some nutter potters in Tasmania, I tell you. If you ever go to Tasmania, wow. I did a clay event. I do this clay event out in Australia, out in the middle of nowhere, and there was this guy, Neil Hoffman. Nutter, isn't he? Nutter, Neil Hoffman. And he says, Keith, I've just come up with this great idea. He says, I've got some clay, but I'm firing it with rock. Clay and rock. And it's great, and it melds together. And it's this molten creation. It's fucking great. Excuse the language. But they're just so enthusiastic about it. And it's just that organic process that gets solidified through fire. Hello, Marta. Hello. I've just talked about you. No, I haven't. I will do, lovey. And that's what we all have in common. And that's why it's so wonderful to be here, looking at people, preaching to the converted, preaching to like-minded people who get it and who appreciate all the work that's in this place that we are now in, Windsor. So thank you very much for listening. Thanks, guys. Thanks.